Welcome to Disclosure Network New York. Today is Sunday, April 28th, 2019. I'm Nick Curto, dnny Director and Co-Founder. dnny is a grassroots organization now celebrating our 18th year of providing 2 meetings per month throughout the year in Manhattan. We focus on cutting-edge UFO, ET issues, paranormal phenomenon, and many related important subjects that the mainstream news will never cover. In other words, who and what is pulling the strings is what we're looking at. Our members do intense investigative research into these various topics and share that information with the group at our meetings, also on the internet for our followers there, and also on the YouTube channel we have. Our motto right from day one is, quote, connecting the dots to seek truth, unquote. We have available to everyone worldwide a DNNY News Blast email service focusing on the topics of special interest that is totally free to everyone. Just go to our website, which is dnny.info, and type in your email address and click. That's all it takes. And you'll be then connected with our news and what's going on for our organization and also worldwide. Many of the people have already signed up for the service. We have hundreds of people in that now, and we'd love to hear from you. Our featured guest speaker for today's meeting is the amazing and really wonderful Harold Egeln. Harold, thank you so much for coming.
Well, you're welcome. I appreciate it very much, and it's good to see wonderful people. Some I know, and others I do not know.
Right. It's an amazing group, and we're
thrilled. It very is.
Thrilled to have you. I'd like to start the program with a few of your background questions, just so we get a little bit more of an idea of you as a person. Okay. Right. So, first off, where were you born?
Irvington, New Jersey.
Ah.
Right.
A Jersey boy.
A Jersey boy.
And did you born to a big family? You have brothers and sisters?
I have 2 younger brothers.
Younger brothers?
One lives in Florida now, one lives in New Jersey still.
And did your family remain there, or did you move around the country?
No, we remained in. I left Irvington when I was 22.
You were there, okay.
Right?
Okay. Mm-hmm. And just a little bit about your schooling, the early schooling, or did you take certain courses, or just briefly?
I took certain courses, and I focused in high school on physics. Didn't have astronomy, but I'm an amateur astronomer since I was 12 years old. I have I have one big telescope, 12-inch now. But that was my background. And I want to mention the one incident that helped me, that shocked me, was in 8th grade. I used to walk in the schoolyard in the morning, and kids surrounded me about my observations as an astronomer, and I told them, what have I learned, which planets have I seen? And so it's a telescope provided by my parents as a Christmas gift when I was 12 years old. So they crowded around me. Then one day they asked, have you ever seen UFOs? I have to be truthful. And I said, twice. Within a few weeks before, I saw a little disc vibrating over the 3-story apartment complex we lived in. And about a week after that, I saw a meteor streak right across the sky and stop.
And it stopped?
It stopped.
So therefore, it was not a meteor?
No, it wasn't a meteor. It just paused, and then I realized that this is not a meteor, which I see now. And then suddenly, once I said that to myself, it zoomed right out to the west. So I told him about that story. The next day, there were packs of kids outside, and the principal was very upset. He called me into his office. He called my parents, and he told me that I'm being suspended from school until the end of the graduation, 2 months away. And then he called an emergency auditorium program. It's a kindergarten to 8th grade school. And I was locked in the principal's office alone as he gave the story that these are misidentified hallucinations. People make judgments. You just can't assume. I never said they were extraterrestrial because the kids asked me, did they see any little green men? The 50s movies were very popular then. And I said, no. I was very honest. I don't know what I saw, but it was strange. I've had a lifetime interest since I was 4 years old in UFOs. Anyway, that was a defining moment of my life because I was ridiculed and bullied in high school. I was called a Martian and all that, and I would never speak to anybody about UFOs except for a few people I trusted, and I was very isolated.
I think the whole room can identify with what you're saying. We've all been through that, and when you see it yourself or hear it or however you feel it, and you can't deny what your senses are telling you.
So something very unusual.
Absolutely. Harold, I'd like to read this amazing it's a short bio of what you've been doing with your life, it reads just amazing. Let me just go through that if you will. 1992, founder and host of Space, SPACE, Search Project for Aspects of Close Encounters Group, president of the New York City chapter of the National Space Society, 2000 president, a staff newspaper reporter from 1989 to 2012, 3 weekly Brooklyn newspapers, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, and the National,
National Garden, Radical
Weekly,
Garden.
right.
Business.
Right, and the Downtown Aquarian, right. Also executive director of New York City office of the Peace Action from 1984 to 89. Amazing. In addition to that, founder of the New York Space Network Astronomy, Facebook public group, 2,700 members worldwide. That's incredible. Congratulations with that. Also the founder of the Space UFO Contact, a Facebook group, a page public group, 710 members worldwide. Excellent again. And 2 more. Speechwriter, media aide for New York City Council member Vincent, is it Gentile?
Gentili.
Right, that. And last, but certainly not least, amateur astronomer. I know that's where your heart is, since the age of 12 with 2 telescopes, or you have.
I have now 2 telescopes, right.
Incredible. What an amazing background.
Forming a group in Southwest Brooklyn, sidewalk astronomy, so we're in the formation of doing that with some people.
This all makes total sense to me too. One thing leads to the next, leads to the next.
Yeah, it does.
And it's a search really for truth.
It's always a search for truth. Right?
Truth and what is really out there, what is going on.
Yeah, we don't know everything, but we know enough that we have to find out the truth. And the only way to do it is talk about it in spark groups and groups like this, wonderful groups like this, and in the media and whenever we can.
I'm very proud of Disclosure Network New York, and a lot of people have commented in the room here that this is a place where they can really let it down and talk all about what's going
Definitely. And I really appreciate, Nick, you've had me here twice. Very early on, I was here with Paul Greco and Francine Dale. We talked about our experiences. The first time, about a year or 2 old at that the group was. And then I made a talk about 4 years ago here, in my own experiences.
Well, you should know that you've already been asked to come back again after this. Oh, absolutely.
Oh, there's so much to talk about.
You have a standing invitation. You do.
Thank you. Appreciate
it. And we are honored, truly, to have someone like you here. Really
I'm honored to see friends and people I don't know. It's an honor to be here with all of you.
So I'll let you start anywhere you'd like, as far as what you'd like to impart.
Yeah. What I'm going to talk about is something I've never talked about in public before. You hear about contact with aliens, extraterrestrials, and all sorts of angels and things like that, as they're described. But what they never talk about is about seeing gnomes, fairies, leprechauns, the shadow people, MIBs, messengers in black, I'll describe that, women in white, voices in winds, that's very important, and more. I'll go into that. And, the white moth, the people who have died and passed on, is a signal from beyond. So I'll be talking about that. So basically my talk evolves. This is the original hard copy of Passport to Magonia from 1969. Have anybody seen this? Everybody seen this? I'll just pass it around. Oh, after I read I'm going to read something from, I'll pass this copy around. Okay, that's the paperback edition. So my talk is going to center on that. Many people have told me privately, because they don't want to associate this with their alien, whatever your extraterrestrial visitors experience, they told me privately of things you would never even hear from experiencers. So I want to get into that. As I mentioned, there will be gnomes, fairies, and so forth. And Jacques Vallée's book, of course, made the connection, the psychological connection, but never mentioned people's experiences. It was early on, it was 1969 I did this book, and there were not the abduction support groups and anything, but my talk is about not mentioning people's names, what they saw and told me privately, and I've seen some of this myself. I'll tell you about that. I want to read two brief vintage poems he has in his sayings in his book. This one from the selected Highland Tales. "How will you go back?" said the woman. "Nay, that I do not know, because I have heard that for those who enter fairyland, there is no going back. They must go, and go on through with it." The other quote is an old litany, which you might have heard of, from ghoulies and ghosties, long-legged beasties, and things that go bump in the night. Good Lord, deliver us. So that's how he begins his book. So I want to get right into it and mention first people seeing gnomes. One time, a member of our group, that's a space support group, told me privately that she worked in the city here. She lives in Queens. She took a bus past Forest Park every morning, and the bus stopped there to pick up some passengers, and she looked at something coming out of the Forest Park, and it was a gnome, not somebody in costume, but it looked like worn clothing that the gnome had, and looked directly and stared right at her to make sure that she saw it. And didn't freak her out, but it surprised her. Okay? Now, years ago, a member of a group who is a UFO artist for many years told me at a Barnes & Noble on Union Square one night, I ran into him and he said, "Harold, you will not believe," I will maybe, "what I saw the other night." And he said that I woke in the middle of the night and there were gnomes all around the room, on the top of the dresser, the foot of my bed, and by my mirror and the door and everything, just staring at me. And he said, I'm surprised, of course, but I didn't feel threatened. And they weren't moving towards me, they weren't making any aggressive moves, just looking at me. Then he went to a deep sleep after that. So he told me that. Now, my own experience happened on the first Saturday evening in May 1970. I had a lot of good friends, and they decided to go to, anybody familiar with the South Mountain Reservation in New Jersey?
Yes.
You are, okay. It's a huge one that stretches from Milburn through West Orange through South Orange. It's a place I've hiked a lot during those
Is
days.
it Watchung?
Not Watchung, no, the South Mountain Reservation. That's for Pleasant Valley Sunday, that area. Anyway, so they were cooking hot dogs and things on top of a waterfall area called Hemlock Falls, a very popular spot for people who visit it. And around midnight, there was a lot of commotion going on nearby. It sounded like it was down below. And they got freaked out. They said, there are some thieves that go through the woods at night, and we don't want to be bothered with the thieves. Okay. They took off immediately, ran. I lingered. I walked past the waterfall because I heard activity below. The waterfall is about 50 feet off the ground, a cliff. I didn't get very close to the cliff, but I looked down, and there's a little stream coming out of the waterfall, a little bridge, and under the little bridge were gnomes. They weren't wearing costumes. They had things that they've worn for a long time. I can tell by the nature of the costumes. Each was holding a candle, and I was very quiet. I did not want to disturb them, but then I turned over this way, and not further than that, the wall over there, there was a black horse with glowing green eyes. Atop of the black horse was someone in black with the hood and all that. He also, or whoever that was a he, I know that, was staring right at me. And I got the message, they're there to protect the gnomes downstairs, down below. I knew that, and I was going to do that. But the message was to get out of there. And I respected that. It was something like Lord of the Rings, the writers they have, where Tolkien gets his ideas from, things like that. Anyway, I ran to the car where the car was parked, and they got to the parked car before anybody else got there. Now, they had left way before me, but I got there before, so I figured, that's strange, it must have been a time shift or something. I didn't even know. That was my own experience. Now I want to go on something that he touched on very, very deeply. Fairies. Fairyland from the Secret Commonwealth and Magonia, which is the name of the book. And there's a friend of mine who used to come to our space meetings, and I can't mention his name, but he goes to a pagan event up in upstate New York every year. He likes to camp out deep in the woods by himself, with nobody else around. He was camping out, and he heard a little commotion, a little singing movement not far away from his tent. He looked out, and there was a fairy circle, with the fairies dancing and singing and having a jolly good time. And he remained quiet too, out of respect for them. But a couple of the fairies looked directly at him, gave him a deep stare. You shouldn't be seeing this. Because sometimes they'd be seen automatically for you just slip some time, whatever. And he decided to close his tent and leave him alone. He heard him singing and dancing. You could hear all that, and they continued. Next night, of course, he didn't go anywhere near that area. He slept with other campers. He told me that story years and years ago. On October 27, 1997, I spoke out at the Eyes of Learning in Long Island. I was invited to speak. There was Michael Carter before me, Bud Hopkins after. And when I got home that evening, my roommate told me something very remarkable. What is it? What is it, Doug? And he said that he went to his closet, which is in my bedroom, and he opened the closet door, and what happened? A fairy blew out. He said it was a typical fairy. The fairy looked at him and acted surprised that it was seen. This pile of clothes, and the fairy dived in and through the clothes. So I didn't even know I had a fairy in my closet. He came out of the closet finally. When the fairies come out of the closet, that's very significant. But it was quite an incident. And during space, we had many away teams. I call them away teams, like they call them in Star Trek The Next Generation. Beginning in 1992, where we visit Brewster, New York, where there are a lot of the UFO sightings going back decades. Henry Luce's Life magazine sent a team of photographers in 1966 for a special issue of Life, and they got it from Kodak, and they had infrared cameras and everything. And we heard that Brewster, of course, we knew Brewster was a hotspot. I was at the UFO conference in Brewster, big UFO conference in Brewster in 1984 when the sightings were at the height. Anyway, we had sightings. Sightings that I won't get into the Greys and all that and other things. But in terms of fairy dust, one of our speakers at a public meeting was Dr. Howard Schachner, who was with Stephen Greer's organization. He's a psychiatrist in Montreal. He has worked in Montreal. And he made his talk. And that evening we went to Brewster. We went to go up there. And soon after we got up there, it was after midnight, and we noticed that the atmosphere had somehow changed. And they were like sparkling green things all over, sparkling. A lot of them, and they were falling on our face, and we could feel that. And he said, Harold, it feels like fairy dust, which is very interesting. We had an experience where we saw something, but it wasn't fairies. And other people have reported fairies up there. I haven't seen them myself, but they're very, it must be a space, because here's where you have the ETs, the visitors, coming on a regular basis, actually. They still are coming, I heard. And so that was the fairy story. How about leprechauns?
Are you Irish, by the way? I would think.
I'm half Irish.
Me too.
My mother's grandparents came from Ireland, the Dailies and O'Halloran's back in 1870. We were one of the Haida families.
What's the other half? Just curious.
1/4 German and 1/4 British colonist and Cherokee.
Amazing. I'm half
From North
Irish
Carolina.
and half Italian. So there you go.
Perfect. Excellent.
Excellent.
That's my background. Now the leprechauns. A friend of Whitley's who used to work for him and go through his mail, who's also a mutual friend of mine, she now lives in Virginia, said we should go to Ireland every once in a while for a visit. And they got this old Irish carriage with the one horse in front. And they were going by a pond. And she heard a pipe playing in the vicinity of the pond. In the middle of the pond was a little islet. And in the islet, it looked like a boy at first, but then she knew it wasn't a boy because of the costume. And the leprechaun, she said, looked directly at her. And the guy driving it, I see it, we see it all the time here. He likes to show off. So she told me about her leprechaun incident. Now, when my brother and I were very young in Irving, New Jersey, we lived in a place called the Barracks, old Army surplus things left over from the World War II. They were there for about 10 years. And I was told years later by my brothers, it was years later, much years later, they said one night they heard some footsteps coming up the stairs. And then they looked out in the hallway, the second floor hallway, and they saw leprechauns in a line going directly to my bedroom. They shared a bedroom. They said they were very quiet. They were shocked. They were leprechauns. My mother's Irish and everything, so Irish was descent. So it made sense to me. And they said never forgot that. And they waited a long time until they were adults before they told me that. That's the leprechaun aspect. Now the shadow people, which have been many reports of in the past few years. The first time I saw a shadow people in 1992, we were up in Brewster, we were space away team, and one person decided to do a meditation circle. I constantly meditate, and I have an area in my mind which I can do so. But I appreciate what that. But I looked down what's called Lower Magnetic Road, Lower Reservoir Road, and not far away, I'd say within 25 feet, I saw two human shadow people forms. I didn't know about shadow people then. One was kneeling down, one was looking directly at us. I didn't say anything because they were involved in their meditation. That's the first time I saw them. Then a few years later, I was on Lower Magnetic Road when we were doing a sky watch over the reservoir. Mm-hmm. And I looked down Lower Magnetic Road, and there was a shadow person running above the road very fast and jumping into the woods, not making a sound. By that time, people were away from me, but I saw that. That was my second sighting. My third sighting was out in Long Island, out where the observatory and planetarium were. We decided to go out there. This was 1992 also, or 1991, before space was founded. And while we were there, we felt a presence, and all three of us saw these shadow people moving among the bushes. They didn't disturb that. They were far off, but we could see them. And then one guy, the guy sitting watching them, said, while he was watching them, I felt pressure on my shoulder. Somebody was touching me. I looked around quickly. Nobody was there. Another time in Brewster was why somebody went on there, made trips up to Brewster with a friend, and said that last time they were there, they saw shadow people. So I went up with them one weekend, and they took me to the spot where they were seen. And they go by a tree, they disappear when they go by the tree, and then run out towards the reservoir. So I said, hope we see them. Well, rewards came. We didn't see the shadow people. Briefly in front of this big tree was a white shadow passing directly in front of the tree, but not a black shadow. We both saw that. It's another incident in Brewster. Then my brother in Florida, on his 65th birthday several years ago, he came up from New Jersey, he was living in Florida, told his niece and some people there, I was overhearing this, that he'd seen shadow people in his condominium apartment in Florida. I didn't know he had seen shadow people. So he described to me exactly, he was describing them exactly, they just walk around, appear, and disappear. So it's the first time I heard anything from him about seeing shadow people. He didn't even know about the history of it, but he had an experience. Now the MIBs, Messengers in Black, I call them that because these are not your typical fancy dressed FBI types, but actually black people who have come up to me and my friends occasionally and delivered cryptic messages. First time was way back in 1978. I was working for a press clipping service in New Jersey, and I was taking the bus back home. And this is 1978. This young black guy was getting off the back door exit. I was sitting before that. He stared directly at me and said, "You're going to be a leader in space." I said, "What?" I said, no way. I don't want to be a leader anyway. I just want to be a part of the crowd. But he looked directly at me and said that. 1978. I didn't see him after that. He just vanished. But that moment used to be the Star Trek moving van company. They passed in front of the bus. So I used to go to Star Trek conventions a lot. That was the first time. Now, several years ago on the Upper West Side, in a Haagen-Dazs up there near, I forget the name of the diner, but it's 72nd Street and 9th Avenue. I was in there, and I was talking with a friend about time, the nature of time, a big clock on the wall which you couldn't miss. And this young black man, very nice, looked directly at me and said, "What time is it?" So the clock is up there. "I don't mean that kind of a time. You know what kind of time I mean." And he didn't get any nicer when he just left. We were having milkshakes, and he just left. That was another time. That was maybe 15 years ago. Also at 23rd Street and 3rd Avenue, a friend and I were walking on the corner, the northeast corner, and this young black man approached me, pointed at me, and said, "You're not from here. You should know better. You should remember." And then he just walked away. I didn't get a chance to talk with him. I don't know what I said. I was thinking maybe not from New York or anything like that. But given the nature of these messengers in black, I found it very intriguing, very mysterious. And there was also a friend in Greenwich Village who had a couple of encounters with men in black and messengers in black, where she was going down to meet friends at a coffee shop. And this black man was very friendly and had and sung a song to her, about her life in brief. And then he just disappeared, and he knew her name right away. And people said, "I don't know this person. They never saw this person before." And she went into the cafe with a friend. And while she was in the cafe, a frequent cafe goer, the scene changed. All around were aliens, as she's described, of various types, sitting at a table where the people were sitting at the same cafe. It only lasted a couple of minutes. They were flabbergasted. They didn't want to speak to them. There were all sorts of different languages going on. And they disappeared and was back to normal. It was right after the MIB. So those are the messengers in black experiences that I want to relate. Now the woman in white. There have been tales of women in white for a long time. I was living in a shared house in East Orange, New Jersey, with several people, friends of mine. And one night it was raining hard. It woke me up. And I looked out. I'm on the second floor. I looked down the driveway between our house and the next house. And I saw someone wearing a female wearing a white gown. And she had a candle, a burning candle, in her hand. It was raining hard. But the candle was burning. And I saw her go around to the back where the basement was, but instead of going to the basement door, she went right through the wall. So that was probably a ghost. I've seen ghosts before, but I realized, what I had just seen. When we moved out of one house, now the woman in white also appeared at another house in West Orange, New Jersey. I shared another house with various people on a 40-acre wood, which was later declared an old-growth forest, which I didn't know at that time. This is when I was in my 20s. And I was a DJ at a New Year's Eve party we had in the house because I loved to play records and I loved the announcement, mostly from the 60s and some from the 50s. It was 1972 going into 1973. And in the morning, somebody slept over. He was sleeping on the couch in the living room. And when he woke up, he told me, "Who was that woman you were last night?" "Oh, I wasn't with anybody." "Nobody at all?" I said, "Harold, you must know. You woke me up during the night. You were walking in the front door, and there was a woman in white, blonde, long blonde hair, exactly what I saw, pushing me up the stairs very gently. And I was kind of in a trance," he said. And I said, "Are you telling me the truth?" "Oh, yes, very definitely. I saw this." I didn't comment anymore. I just kept very quiet about it. And that house is haunted. I won't get into that. Anyway, so that's the woman in white. Voices on the Wind. One time in early 1973, I had a girlfriend at the time, and we were the only ones in the house. Everybody else had left for various social events, dinner and so forth. And we heard a lot of wind blowing out in the back, breezes and everything. We came out the front door, and we heard voices in the wind. It was like a party was going. There was no way there could be a party out there. We were curious to go out. And she said, "Harold, let's not go out." Where the voices were emanating from, it was an old mansion that had burned down years ago. It was the mansion of the guy who originally owned the area. It was George McClellan, the Union general who led the army and quit because he wanted peace with the South and all of that, on reasonable terms. He ran as a peace candidate for Democrats in 1864. He eventually became governor of New Jersey, so he needed a house, and he chose West Orange because it's a beautiful piece of land. So we kind of figured, she knew about this, that it was probably a ghostly type party going on at the burnt down mansion. It was only the foundation. So we heard that. By the way, I want to mention that the people who designed Central Park in the 1920s redesigned that whole area. The son of the person, I forget his right name, who designed Prospect Park and Central Park and a lot of other places. It was redesigned, so everything was landscape back there. Halstead, that's right, exactly. So that was one thing. Now, one of the most bizarre things, which I still don't even believe, when I was a child, it was Halloween. My mother was driving us up, or backing home from our sisters. And it was a full moon that night. I was in the back seat. I looked up at the moon, and it was beautiful because astronomy. And I saw a shadow, a black shadow of a witch on a broom. And I said, "It's impossible." I still say it's impossible. But that's what I saw. I didn't mention it to my parents at all. I kept very quiet about it. I know a lot of people have been in covens and so forth. I have several friends who have been in covens. So, but I didn't have, at that age, around 10 years old, I didn't. But I saw that, and I never got that. That's the witch story, witch in a broom story. Oh, the goblins. I'd never seen a goblin. they have him in Lord of the Rings. Very nasty people, nasty characters, not very handsome. I had some friends who attended one of the meetings of this years ago. We were talking afterwards, and they confided in me that they wanted to go out in the woods one night, and they took their car out there, and they sat there for a while. They were thinking of going out into the woods. Then they heard a big commotion in the woods, and out of this woods came, anyway, they came out of the woods, and it was the ugliest group of people they ever saw, and they were angry, these dozens of them. They came towards the car, they began banging on the car, "Don't bother us, stay away from us." And they looked directly in, they tried to block the car, and they managed to get out of there, but they would never come back there again. It still gives me goose pimples to the way they told the story. I classify they can have as monsters. I would call them the goblin category, which he has in his book. And one more, the white moth. Has anybody here read Whitley and Ann Strieber's 2015 book, The Afterlife Revolution? Well, it's a Mothman connection. I'm going to mention a sidebar on that. But anyway, have you heard of the book? Ann Strieber died about 6 years ago, and she promised to communicate with Whitley. And they wrote a book together. As the best way they could communicate it. She couldn't show themselves. And in the book on the cover has a white moth on it. And the white moth is a way that Anne described to Whitley, who's been a friend of mine for 30 years, how she can communicate physically through the white moth. The white moth will visit him. He had seen the white moth a few times, and it's only a temporary thing, but it's a physical manifestation, a very gentle one, because it's hard to come back and show your human body, very difficult. But people have seen people fully human. So she mentioned that. Anyway, I didn't get, a friend of mine sent me the book. I didn't even know about the white moth. The night before the book came through the mail, in front of my face was a white moth. Now, I didn't make a connection, of course. I thought it was I never had a moth. It's all I clothes in this apartment that my roommate and I had. But never a white moth of any kind. It's deliberately flying all around me, looking at me, kind of looking at me. Then I get the book the next day in the mail from a friend who was a member of the space group. And it says there was a cover, and then I realized I read that section about the white moth, the chapter about the white moth, right away before I read any other part of the book. It's a way of communicating. Now, my roommate and best friend for over half of my lifetime passed away 2 years ago. You've met him. On April 30th, to be 2 years ago, this Tuesday. And he was very sick. He had an infection on the foot. And the infection, we got him to Humanities. He didn't want to go to any hospital. Very stubborn, as you know. Anyway, so we got him to the hospital. He refused any treatment, but they immediately put him in the urgent care unit of the emergency. That he almost died there for some reason, but they revived him very well. And that said he has an infection on the foot. Further analysis, when he was moved to the critical care unit at Maimonides, was that he had a sepsis infection. It had a 50-50 chance of getting it through. They were working on that for 2 days. They said as long as it doesn't go to the heart, he'll probably be safe. And then on 2 days after he was admitted to the hospital, I went there to see him, and there were a team working around him. And I was told by two friends of him who were trying to visit, including a childhood friend of his, that he had a slight heart attack. So I knew at that point that the sepsis infection, went to his heart. And I knew that would be the end. I was told. He survived 4 days in life support set up by his sister. And then on the very day he died, it was a Sunday, I was there. I was with him through the whole process. They took him off life support and everything. And he died peaceful. He could hear me talking because I could see movement on his face as he sat there. Then, of course, he fell. The blood pressure began falling. And he had a big smile on his face. I didn't see anything unusual, but I knew he was okay. And that was an incident, a very traumatic incident for me, and of course, 62 years old, that's all. If we had known he had the foot infection earlier, he was very quiet about things. I'd be quiet about medical conditions of my own. So he probably didn't want to disturb me on that. That's what happened in the white moth. I had 7 sightings of the white moth. That evening, he had a favorite chair he sat on. And the white moth emerged from the area of the chair, flew around the room. I have a lot of collectibles in my apartment. In fact, I call it the Imagitorium Museum in Magonia. I have star collectibles, I have gnomes, I have an original honeymooners set from 1955. All sorts of things. It's filled. So the moth flew around. I'll say he flew around, looking at all because I made a lot of changes. It's always good after a person passes away to make changes in your apartment anyway. Part of the therapy. And looked around and flew out in the back. And he did that. The moth actually accompanied me to the elevator to the basement where I was taking some trash out. And Doug loved going down to the basement. Every night he would take something down. I was doing that now, like the recyclables and the trash. And the moth was following me. It didn't come down to the basement. And I said, maybe I lost the moth. Maybe it's in the apartment somewhere. 2 days later, I was walking 2 blocks from home, and right in front of me was the white moth who settled and sat on the sidewalk. I knew he was okay. He was back. He managed to get back inside. And then a day or 2 later, I saw him again emerging from his favorite chair and flying around for one last time. And that's the white moth thing, and I had to mention that. So these are some of the passages to Magonia that people who are either direct experiences with the visitors or indirect. There's a category which I call indirect experiencers. They have seen UFOs. They never had a close encounter of any type that they know of, but yet they've seen many UFOs and things like that. So they've had some of these experiences too. And the whole fairy tale is very interesting. Fairy tales. Back in 1892, William Butler Yeats wrote the book on Irish fairies and folktales, which I have a copy of. And that's a fascinating book. He refers to it in his book. And there are a lot of tales that actually match close encounter experiences. So I just want to mention that. And there's another book that came out a few years ago in Barnes & Noble, the Book of Fairies, in older forms, 50 forms of fairies. And so there's a whole range. And so people have seen them. People have seen these inhabitants of Magonia that's here sometimes. We can see accidentally, sometimes deliberately. And that's basically my talk for the day that I want to share. For the first time I've talked about this in public. I thought this is the best place to talk about it. I know I'm among friends here. So.
We are honored. Well, guys, it's such an amazing group of experiences from different realms also. I'm sure the room has many questions. So I'm just going to ask everybody, please, if you just put your hands up, and I'll try to get to everybody, and just phrase one-sentence questions. But first, give your first name. We'll go right. Anybody? Okay, then you first. Go ahead. First name, and then your one.
Yeah, my name is Linda.
Really loud.
My name is Linda, and forgive me, but I don't know what a gnome looks like. What does it look like?
Well, years ago, around 1980s, there was a fascination with gnomes. Mm-hmm. And there's a gnome book, gnome calendars, little figures. There's a gnome house, mm-hmm. which you had to put together yourself, which I did at the time. And I have a little gnome house with gnomes in it. They're in a form of fairies, furry folk. And they were in, have you ever seen any of the Lord of the Rings movies?
Yeah.
The gnomes are in there. They're depicted differently than the ones, and they have that on Star Trek too, The Next Generation. But anyway, the gnomes are very interesting creatures in themselves. They're small. More like the I would say the blue people that Whitley Strieber had seen, visit him in his apartment.
Do they have
And
human faces?
They look old.
they look old and they're wide faces.
I see.
Right.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go right this way. Like I said, go ahead, first name
Rena.
and your question.
Can I share a thing about the fairies? That I
Oh, of
had?
course, definitely.
When I was a little kid, I used to play in the backyard, and there was fairies around me all the time.
Mhm.
And when I was 5 years old, I used to go to my father's softball games, and I used to go back behind the seats,
Seats, right.
and I would see the fairies back there. And when I was 5 years old, they came and they told me, "We're sorry, but we're going to have to leave you now,
Mhm.
and you won't see us until you're over 20 years old." Well, in my 20s, I was hiking through the woods
Right.
with a friend of mine, and we got separated, and these fairies came in a ring around my head for about 30
Fairy.
seconds, just dancing and frolicking,
Wow.
and I'm just sitting there like,
Awestruck, right?
Awestruck.
Yes.
Did you have also a question?
That's a
have you ever
fascinating
seen the fairies?
I've never seen them actually. I've seen others, as I mentioned, but not the fairies myself. And I was very fortunate that Doug saw them, so he related to me something that was in my closet. For whatever reason, I don't know. He was playing on me.
Thank you for your question. We're going to go for you, and then we'll go here. Go ahead.
Hi.
Really loud because you're in the back.
Cornelia, and you didn't mention Lindisfarne, but if you have heard about it, do you have any comments?
Which,
Lindisfarne. It's a place that today is a conference center.
I've heard of it.
was
I've heard of it, right,
started
I've heard of
in
it.
the 60s, well, it goes before the 60s.
I'm familiar with it, I've heard of it.
By this very psychic woman and her husband. Oh, I'm sorry. Findhorn.
Scotland.
Findhorn.
Oh yes, I'm familiar with that. I've read a lot about that, right.
It's called
That's where it is.
Findhorn.
Yeah.
Findhorn.
Yeah, Findhorn, right,
Yes,
I knew
and
about
they-
that, yes.
They communicated with the nature spirits.
Yeah, I'm
and were
familiar
able
with that,
to
right.
grow huge flowers.
Oh, I
in
know, I'm a big
January.
fan of
So you know
Findhorn,
that.
right, yes. Mhm.
I'm sorry, I
That's okay,
No, it's
yeah.
right.
of a Scottish monastery.
Lindisfarne is in Northumberland.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay,
Makes
you
sense.
don't go better about it.
Thank you for that.
Very
You are
good.
next.
Very
First
pleased.
name?
Naomi. I remember Brewster. We took one trip.
Right.
And my question is, there were a lot of caves there,
Oh, yes.
and there was a cave, and I wanted to walk into the cave, but I was so frightened.
Yeah.
That had never happened to me before.
Mhm.
My question is, did you ever make other trips to Brewster, and were you ever in those caves, and did you ever see shadow people in those caves?
No, there's a very good reason why we weren't in the caves. We made, over the course of 10 years, dozens of visits to Brewster. We saw the lights move in the sky one time when they were doing a meditation. I'll get to that in a moment. And they were doing meditation. We want to see the lights that were moving and stopping form a triangle in the sky. Then suddenly out of the west, three lights came, and this is after midnight, and they formed a perfect triangle in the sky. They're responding to us, so they do respond sometimes. So, but in terms of the question, no, because Phil and Brogno, we met in '89, first time. Actually, I met him in '84. Told me that he went into the caves, the big cave up there, on Lower Magnetic Mine Road in the hill up there, and it's filled with water. He was able to get through the water, but he felt he couldn't go any further. He didn't want to get stuck. And he didn't want to get stuck, and he just had a feeling I better not go any further into that
Right.
cave. And he advised nobody to go in the cave because if he got lost, how would I get out?
Yeah.
Yes,
Little problem there.
yes, and you don't want to be in a situation
Right
like
over.
that.
What an experience that would be.
Yes.
Okay, we have another hand up, please.
Yes,
Hi,
ma'am.
my name is Hal. Back when I was a kid, Staten Island was 90% woods. There was a time we were hiking, a friend of mine. We weren't, maybe we were 12. And one thing we came came across that I never fully understood. There was an area of flat ground, a lot of trees, and the ground came like this in a flat stone, built stone wall, and looked like some sort of metal, kind of like rusty, so it might have been iron gate, and then gate and then the fieldstone wall just went right back into the earth. The only thing is, the wall was, this section of wall, which was about this big on either side, was no more than a foot high.
Okay.
Out of nowhere, and the gate looked like somebody had blasted into it. And I was wondering if you would ever come across anything like that in any of your reading.
No, that is very interesting now that you saw that. I'm not familiar with that. There was a gate in the woods in West Orange, New Jersey, and I had a feeling that I was being watched. There was an area that was landscaped called the Japanese tree garden, and I would sit in the tree because the branch was so low and meditate, and I felt that I was being watched several times, and one time during the day. But to get in there, you go through, there are two ways there. You can go through the greenhouse area or through the gate. That's the immediate entrance, and filled with all these beautiful vines and everything. But I don't know whether the gate had anything to do with it. It was a low gate. It was part of the landscaping that was done in the 1920s, right? Nothing exactly like that at all. I appreciate hearing that.
If you ever want to go to Staten Island to that place, would you know where it is?
It's gone now.
Okay.
By now, right?
We got some more hands up there. Thank you for your question. And, we got one more. Go ahead. First name, really loud.
My name's Sarah. What is the relationship between these creatures and the Fairies?
Well, the Visitors, what's what the book about Jacques Vallée is about. Have you ever read this or no?
I've never read it.
Okay, it was very popular when it came out, and I bought it years later. Anyway, the relationship is that there are certain things about missing time. People have had experience with the fairy folk where they seem to be gone for a long time, like sometimes in experiences for the visitors, and they can't keep. It's like a time shift or a time missing time, basically, but a time that stood still outside the experience, but was timelessness inside the experience. That's a major concept within fairy lore, folklore. So there's a connection right there, and there are other connections to abducting people. There are all these folk tales gathered in that book I mentioned before by Yeats. People being abducted and put to task. This is centuries ago, 18th century, 17th century, and cleaning up their places and routine things, and then letting go. And they'd been away for a while. Then they said, "Where have you been for the last few minutes or hours?" So that's a connection there too.
I want to say that you might be interested to know there's a play by J.M. Barrie, who was the person who wrote the Academy. It's an earlier play. It's called Mary Rose, and it's about this. It's about a young girl.
Yeah, it sounds very familiar.
You talking about Peter Pan? No. Before Peter Pan.
He wrote other,
Mary Rose.
Big.
Stop.
Thank you for your question. Okay, we got a hand up over here.
Yes, I'm Marcy. I've known Carl for over 22 years.
Yep.
The artist from the space group that you referred to and seemed to know, was that David Huggins? Because he's spoken to the group.
No, it's somebody
That
else.
artist?
Somebody else, not David Huggins.
Interesting, because I figured David, if he'd seen those, he probably would have taken them.
He probably did, right? He would have gotten mad. I'm sure he would have, but this is someone else who just happened to the experience. He's never had a UFO experience, but he's famous back to 1980 in the UFO community. In 1980, Jim Moseley had his second conference in New York, and the artist was there at the Doral Inn on the Upper East Side. I went there, and Betty Hill was there. A new guy on the block named Stanton Friedman talked about one of his first talks about Roswell.
Oh.
Betty Hill was very interesting. And a very famous actor whose name I won't mention, but would be known instantly if I mention his name, sitting in the back room and had a big talk with Betty Hill, by the way.
We had the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, who works for
Oh, yes,
Fox.
Catherine Marden.
Yes,
Right.
I'm sure you know
Oh,
her.
yes.
Yeah, and she gave a wonderful talk here
Oh, she
also.
would, right? She was here, right? I missed that.
Oh, yeah, she was just
Absolutely.
amazing. So, yeah. Okay, we have more hands up. We'll go this way again. Go ahead.
My name is Tom, and my question is, did you hear any of these creatures speak or sing, and what do they sound like?
I mean, the visitors?
Any of them?
Well, I'll tell from personal experience. In 1988, I was working with the Peace Action, was actually called the Committee for Sane Nuclear Policy at that time. And a friend of mine wanted to go up and see any visitors, but we got separate communications. She was a psychic, and I appreciated her work in the psychic field. She did very well. I knew her through the Seth groups back in the late 80s, and I first met her then. And so she decided, she recontacted me and said, let's make a communication with them. Could you give us a date when we can meet? Now, she independently got a date. I independently got a date. And we didn't speak about it until we actually met. Now, I'll get to your background here, what your question is. And it was August 11th, which is the, I forget the name of the saint, but she's the saint of TV. Official patron saint of TV. She was actually the patron saint of communications, television, and all that. Anyway, so that was a weekend. Because I wanted to see at this time I was going through my experience, I contacted Bud and I was trying to, dogging him, he was getting so busy. He actually referred me to the late Dr. Gene Mundy. It was terrific with me. Anyway, we decided, we went together, we got the same date. We said we're getting a genuine communication from the visitors. So we arranged to go up. We stayed at a house for 2 nights, the house of one of the publishers, editors for Isaac Asimov, who was alive then. And the first night out, we went to Brewster, our first trip there, Magnetic Mine Road. I was very scared. I would freak out and my hair would turn white. My hair turned white for other reasons, traumatic reasons, but not that. A few years later. Anyway, second night we went out around midnight. And we were up in Upper Magnetic Mine Road, where most of the experiences happened. And she was doing her meditation. I didn't get involved. I walked towards the end of the road, to the road looking out in the reservoir, which is about 30 feet out. And then I saw them. The visitors, black eye, the green eyes actually glowing. There were 5 of them moving above the ground. Now that didn't make any noise. They were very quiet. They weren't rustling. You couldn't hear them rustling through the twigs or anything. They didn't sing. They didn't make any noise at all. But my friend got very afraid of them. She's not an experiencer. And they came no further, which is good because they didn't want to frighten. They promised us we would not be frightened from it. But for me, it was the first time I saw. My physical eyes was proof. I knew they were real. But to actually see them and actually have a communication with them was a revelation in themselves. But nobody has ever heard singing from them. I'm trying to recall if anybody ever heard any sounds or anything else. They haven't sung anything. They haven't said, everybody's gone to the moon or everything like that, famous songs. But they never said anything, never sang anything, except once, which I didn't experience. Somebody else experienced that. Totally different time frame and totally different circumstances.
Thank you for your question there, Tom.
Thanks,
You
I
have a
like
question?
that question.
Okay, you're next. Oh, your first name?
Lorraine, I don't know where I'm going with this.
Really loud, please.
I just want to tell you that while I'm sitting here, I feel and I know you've never came here, okay, not really.
Really loud, please.
I feel like I've heard your talk before. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I will tell you this. I had an experience with Albiliac, okay?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And I had a conversation with him. As a matter of fact, I had coffee with him.
Uh-huh.
I feel like I've heard your lecture. Of course, I mean, I know that I met you, but I feel
met
like
you.
the
You're
conversation that you just gave, I feel like I've heard it before.
In some other context or some other place?
Other
or
context.
Would you like to speculate on that, what your ideas are?
I don't know where I'm going with this, but I will tell you this. my very, very close friend who now lives in California. Her name is Nancy Costa. Sorry.
You got to took off, please.
My very, very close friend, her name is Nancy Costa.
Great.
When I was much younger, probably in my 20s,
Uh-huh.
we would go to the Watchung Mountains.
Oh yeah, I've been there too.
And I remember an experience, okay? And this is just, I don't know how it's related, okay? But I went with Nancy, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and we went to Watchung.
Right.
And I remember there was like a, I don't know, it was like a kind of like brushes. They were like woods. It was like woods. And I remember going there at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I remember seeing deer. Now, I don't know why
Right.
I'm even mentioning this, okay? But I feel like, and I will tell you this,
Uh-huh.
my conversation and my experience with Nancy Kostiak, okay,
Right.
was definitely not you. But I had the same experience with Al Biliak,
Uh-huh.
okay? I feel like I've heard this conversation before. I don't know where.
What I just talked about, or
All right. Do you have a question besides that?
Well, no, I just feel like the things that you've said, and I'm wondering, are you friends with Al Biliak?
no,
Were
I
you?
know him, but this is you're the second person who's mentioned that. A year and a half ago, I was up at Paul Greco's, one of his last UFO roundtables meetings, and this guy kept bugging me. He said, "You're not from here. You know too much." I just know.
That is the
Anybody
thing.
here, knows a lot about this, obviously. And so I take it, but he's insistent. Well, I said, I have to leave for a moment because I have to go to the bathroom. That will prove I'm from here.
These
I had to go
connections
that
are there. We've got to go. We've got a
Anyway.
couple more we have to get to, and then I have a couple more before we go.
Oh, of course, right.
If that's all right?
Oh, we have time.
Okay, good. I'm going to grab something to drink. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to do a few more questions. I think you, and then you, and then you, and then one more. No? Okay, 3 more, and that's it. Go ahead.
This is in connection with what she just
Again,
said.
your name first.
Rena.
And really loud, please.
Okay. I had a deja vu experience when I first came in here today,
Me too.
and it centered around that whir of something that happened when we were, that really laid the foundation of the feeling that I got that
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
somehow this has happened before or something. It's
Really?
really
Whoa.
weird.
Yep.
Really weird.
I did it.
Oh.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, we're going to go you, and then we're going to go to the last question. Okay, go first. Go ahead. Really, really loud. I mean, really loud.
Some people in this corner missed out on some things because you are tough, you're very soft-spoken.
Yes, I am. I'm trying to speak
Everyone
because I've done so many
know,
TV programs.
First of all, what was it, a white moth you were talking about earlier? And then when you spoke to Tom, you talked about hearing somebody sing, and we didn't know who was singing.
Yeah, the first,
That's all.
I'll explain that because that's part of what I was talking about
It was
before.
a white moth.
The first part was the white moth. When Ann Strieber, after she died, and Whitley Strieber wrote a book, which came out 2015. He had communication with her. She promised that. She managed to communicate with him. So she's the author of much of that book. And so she had the experience. He wondered, why don't you appear physically? He said it's very difficult to take that form, especially when you're gone for a while, because things are changing. It's a totally different environment. And the only way I can do it is through the white moth, which has a whole story that I'd never heard of before, that other people have reported. The book, there's a whole chapter just about people who've had experiences of. Right.
What about the singing? You were talking to
Well, the
Tom.
singing, to answer that?
We'll just go one more. That's one
That's all
question.
you were asking.
Now, the singing, I mentioned about the house in West Orange. Before I get into where the singing is, I have to mention that it was haunted. I didn't have any haunted experience in the house. In fact, the whole experience there, I had my first retrieve abduction visitation, which didn't involve an examination out in the woods. But I was taken aboard because I was going through a period of depression because of a car accident. I was revived, and an actual female visitor was aboard the craft and mentioned we were just concerned about your state of mind. Anyway, in the place, one night, this guy is a lawyer. He's a very strict lawyer, and wants it logically and everything. Heard some singing in the living room downstairs. It was a female voice, a very beautiful female voice. He said, playing guitar. He said, well, someone left the record player on, big stereo system. We were out in the woods. Anyway, and he went down. There was nobody singing. There's nothing on. He checked everything, but it was so beautiful song that it amazed him. He heard that. Didn't directly involve the visitors unless she was a visitor. But anyway, he heard that singing. That's one incident. If she was a visitor, which I think she was, she communicated to somebody in the house about that.
Thank you.
Interesting. Okay, we have one more. Naomi, please, the last one.
Oh, okay, my name is Naomi, and I would like to ask you personally, were you ever regressed? You knew a Jean Mundy or something. Is she still alive, or
No,
were
she
you ever
passed
regressed?
away. She passed away in her Long Island home, way out in Southampton, years ago now.
Oh,
What happened was, I wanted to know more. I do meditation, so I do.
oh, you do.
Yeah, ever since 20s. Anyway, so I was very easily hypnotized the very first time I went to her in August since when I had the incident up in Brewster. And she regressed me to a time in 1980 when I probably had a visitation in Bloomfield, New Jersey, in our house in Bloomfield, New Jersey, a rented house, where I woke up one night and it was like a radio playing many, many stations in my mind. So that's some sort of communication. And I felt I was not from here, I was taken someplace. I woke up in the morning with a rash on my face, both cheeks. And so we went that, and then we recalled the experience I had in the woods in December 5th, 1972, which I won't go into totally. And she said my face turned red again. I had that rash on and off for about 5 years. The dermatologist said he didn't know the origin of it. Just take some cream, and it came and went, and then finally went by 1988. And so I'm trying to answer your question right. Have I answered it right, or?
Yes, it's so far.
Yeah. Well, and Jean Monday, I had 12 sessions with her. Half of those were just conversations. She was she worked for St. Vincent's Hospital as a consultant for many years, and she taught psychotherapy out in Long Island somewhere. And so we had many conversations. Others were hypnosis. The first hypnosis I asked Dr. Jean Mundy, it didn't sound real to me. No. But I mentioned the rash during the hypnosis session. She said, while I was in hypnosis, my cheeks turned bright red during the description. And I said, no. But that sent chills through my spine for her to say that. I know she's very, very confident. By the way, she got involved in this because she was at a meeting in '87 of psychiatrists and psychologists and psychotherapists, and she heard some screaming from a room, a locked room. She knocked on the door. She walked in there, and the screams of Betty and Barney. Barney Hill was screaming on a tape that was made in the 1960s. That's how she became interested. She spoke at one of her meetings in 1994. Very good talk with her.
Thank you for your question. Wow. So we're coming to the end of the meeting, and for I think the listeners that are with us too, I think that part of your experiences, you strike me, you always have, as being very receptive. That there's no walls there.
No.
You're
walls, whether along Mexico or something, anywhere, or you build bridges. Build bridges with people.
Yep.
And there are many types of bridges that can be built, and this is one of them.
And also, and with that, for the listeners, is there any meditation or is there any things that they can do to maybe further their receptivity? Because I think a lot of people would want to have these kind of experiences, and they're wondering if they could kind of tune up, in a sense. Is there any
I know what you mean,
recommendations?
right. I think people can find out that for themselves. I know people can. It's all within us.
Okay,
It's a matter of searching and finding our ways
within?
to do that. Right, within. It's
Within.
within the person. The person is the most important thing. Each individual. It's extremely important. And there are hidden resources. We all well known with deep in the subconscious mind and superconscious mind.
And opening yourself up
Exactly right.
for that,
Yeah.
and
With
saying,
caution,
I'm here,
of course.
and I'm ready when you are, in a sense.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
That's basically it, right? And the person's choices and their own choice.
Well, Harold, this has been, again, an extraordinary talk that you've been so wonderful to give us on a very personal level, too, and we really appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen of the room, would you please give bravo! Okay, so this is Disclosure Network New York, and thank you very much for listening. And